By the mid-60s, the American folk revival was at its peak. Joan Baez and Peter, Paul and Mary were topping the charts, and folk music had entered into pop culture. Folk singers are starting to drift away from traditional folk songs, and Bob Dylan symbolized this change when, in the summer of 1965, he plugged in his electric guitar for the first time at the Newport Folk Festival. Folk was also beginning to move from social and political themes toward music that was more personal and introspective, triggering a new generation of singer-songwriters to emerge, including Tom Rush, Eric Anderson, Judy Collins, and Jim Croce. Croce, a Pennsylvania native, would spend much of his career toiling in blue-collar jobs and playing gigs wherever he could find them. With his trademark mustache, battered work shirts, and humble demeanor, he enraptured audiences with his storyteller style and sentimental songs. His lyrics, sometimes witty and sometimes sorrowful, painted colorful portraits of the people he met, and poignantly captured the human spirit and a changing America. Croce was relatively unknown as he toured around the Northeast, but his music eventually started getting noticed, and in the early 70s, he released his first album with ABC Records, which was an instant success. Jim Croce was at the height of his career when a plane crash tragically ended his life in 1973. He was 30 years old. James Joseph Croce was born in 1943 to a large Italian-American family in a working-class neighborhood of South Philadelphia. Growing up on ragtime and country music, he started playing the accordion at age 5 and taught himself guitar as a teenager. While a student at Villanova University, Croce sang in an all-male chorus and a cappella group. He also formed a few bands and performed at coffee houses around Philadelphia. He once said that he would play anything people wanted to hear: blues, rock, railroad music, anything. Croce came of age in an era steeped in the plight of regular people trying to make ends meet. His influences include Woody Guthrie, the godfather of American folk music, who in the 1930s and 40s sang about the devastations of the Great Depression and captured the struggles of the poor and powerless. Croce's songs drew on his experiences hanging out at cheap bars and cobbling together an income with low-paying jobs. He worked in construction, welded, and drove a truck. He also taught special education students at a middle school, wrote ads for a local R&B station, and even joined the National Guard, all the while writing about the characters he met along the way. In his debut album, released in 1966, a young Croce already shows his affinity for the trials and triumphs of working-class life, especially in his covers of Steel Rail Blues and Coal Tattoo. His musical interpretation of Rudyard Kipling's poem, Gunga Din, tells the story of a lowly yet loyal water carrier for British creative soldiers, reflecting not only Croce's bias toward blue-collar tales, but also his love of both literature and folklore that flavored his music. Just as Croce's musical career was beginning to take off in the suburbs of Philadelphia, a cultural shift was taking place across the country. The 60s was one of the most tumultuous and divisive periods in American history, marked by the Civil Rights Movement, the Vietnam War, and the emerging generation gap, where young people seemed to rebel against everything their parents had believed in, from music and personal values to political views. At the same time, society was moving away from the industrial age toward an economy dominated by white-collar jobs, creating an increasing sense of alienation among the working class. The Vietnam War, combined with economic anxiety, stirred in many Americans deep resentment, anger, self-doubt, and envy, feelings that would become fodder for Jim Croce's songs.
This is a story about a guy that thinks he should be ruling the universe somewhere, but he's really working at a car wash. The title's really a long one. It's called I Goddamn Steadily Depressing, Low Down Mind Messing, Working at the Car Wash Blues.
And just as Woody Guthrie expressed the hopes and concerns of a nation paralyzed by the Depression in the 1930s, Croce seemed able to tap into the dreams and struggles of the young working class of middle America, from the wannabe executive making minimum wage and working at the car wash blues, to the long-haul truck driver and speedball tucker.
His songs spoke directly to people. There's no artifice in there. There's no faking it. It's all very direct, and it's real-life people. It's working folks. It's normal, real people, and it's their stories. People could relate, and that goes a long way.
While Croce was part of the new wave of singer-songwriters, his music continued to reflect traditional folk. He wrote everything from feisty Scottish sea shanties to melancholy ballads like Operator. inspired by his time in the military, when he would listen to other soldiers calling home on the payphones. Another of Croce's ballads chronicles the fate of one of the toughest guys on Chicago's South Side. The song revives the so-called bad man ballad of the 19th century that told the violent and sometimes sordid tales of outlaws, rebels, and renegades. But Croce's take is less sordid than it is silly, and his cautionary tale about messing with the wife of a jealous man was an instant hit and spent 2 weeks at the top of the Billboard chart. In 1968, Croce and his wife Ingrid, also a singer-songwriter, moved to New York City, where they would record their first album together. They would spend the next 2 years playing at small clubs and colleges to promote the record, but it ultimately failed to get public acclaim. Disillusioned by the music business, they returned to Pennsylvania, renting a little farmhouse apartment just outside of Philadelphia. Croce went back to truck driving and construction work, but continued to write songs, often about the people he met on the job. He would also create some of his best-known lyrics in those days. After finding out that Ingrid was pregnant with their son, Adrian James, Croce wrote Time in a Bottle, and A Visit with an Astrologer inspired the love song Photographs and Memories. In 1970, Croce met Maury Muehlhausen, a classically trained musician from Trenton, New Jersey, who would become Jim's close friend, his lead guitarist, and a major influence on his music. Eventually, Croce's perseverance paid off, and in 1972 he landed a 3-record contract with ABC Records. He also began appearing on television, including his national debut on The Tonight Show. He played at Madison Square Garden and, with Maury, conducted a European tour. For all of his fans, Croce had his share of critics too. Rolling Stone called his hit song Time in a Bottle a sugar-crusted plinky-plunky slow waltz. But there was no denying his appeal to regular people, and by the early 70s his songs had become a staple of radio play.
In all honesty, I wasn't the biggest Jim Croce fan. He was just a little mild-mannered in how he presented it to me. I got the popularity of the songs, and I played them because, in radio, doing it, even though I was picking all the tunes, I wasn't just there to make myself happy. I'm there to make a broader audience happy.
While Croce was well known for his humility, his wife describes his journey as a heroic one. His lyrics, she says, resonate deeply with many everyday Americans and continue to provide a voice to the everyman. Ironically, though, while Croce had gone from truck driver to international star, he was never able to enjoy any other life for himself but the paycheck-to-paycheck existence he so evocatively sang about. His breakout album, You Don't Mess Around with Jim, boasted the #1 hit, Leroy Brown, but an onerous recording deal prevented Croce from ever receiving any royalties. And while his college concerts were earning up to $10,000 a night, he was only bringing home $200 a week, the result of another bad contract he had signed years earlier. Touring had started to take its toll on Croce, and in the summer of '73, he decided it was time for a break from the music business so that he could be at home with his wife and young son. But he would never have that opportunity. On September 20th, 1973, Jim Croce, Maury Muehlhausen, and 4 others were killed in a plane crash in Louisiana. Croce had finished a concert and was taking a chartered flight to Texas to play another gig. Upon takeoff, the plane did not gain enough altitude and clipped a tree at the end of the runway. Jim Croce was buried in the quiet suburbs of his native Philadelphia. Small tributes decorate the bronze marker bearing his name, and the sapling pine his wife Ingrid planted over 4 decades ago today towers against the sky.
You never know how his muse would have led him, but I'm pretty sure that he would have had a lot more songs about real folks. He was never a guy to put on airs. He was a real down-earthy kind of guy. And I don't think he'd have lost that.
Next guest is one of those overnight successes who only took 12 years to make it. But during that time, when he wasn't driving a truck, he was teaching special education and entertaining the bar and beer pitcher set. I guess you could say he's a man of the people. Maybe that's why he writes about them so well. Ladies and gentlemen, Jim Croce.
Set of footsteps on your floor in the morning. But every one less set of footsteps on your floor, one less man to walk in, one less pair of jeans upon your door, one less voice a talking. But tomorrow's a dream away. Today has turned to dust. Your silver tongue has turned